One day, I randomly remembered a fake Pokemon leak called Pokémon Plus and Minus, and I want to talk about it. The earliest mention of this supposed pair of games that I can find is a Dual Pixels article from January 6, 2014, where the author mentions directly speaking with the leaker in question. The article gives the usual disclaimer of how this leaker predicted things correctly in the past, but also they got some things wrong, and then the bulk of it is a list of bullet points on what the supposed game would look like. So, with that time span, there's two things to keep in mind. First, this was not too long after X and Y's release, but still a couple months before Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were officially revealed. I imagine that to some that would immediately disqualify the leak, but to play devil's advocate exactly once before I immediately shift gears to laughing at how fake it is, the timing is pretty consistent with what Pokemon dev cycles are like. In a September 2013 interview, Junichi Masuda stated that X and Y started development around 3 years ago, which would be sometime around the Japanese release of Black and White. And the time from the earliest mention of the leak to the release of Sun and Moon is roughly similar. Furthermore, the bullet point saying a few areas marked out, tons of concept art, and the other one suggesting that the names Plus and Minus are just code names pretty clearly convey that this is early in the game's development. The other main piece of historical context I need to preface this leak with is how this was when the initial rumors about what would eventually be revealed as a Switch would start to surface. The first bullet point of this leak mentions Game Freak being one of the first devs to receive alpha prototype hardware that had since been upgraded to a beta prototype, and several of the game's supposed gimmicks revolved around a handheld controller and a terminal unit. And while you can vaguely say that's like the Switch, it's arguably closer to the Wii U, and in fact a decent percentage of the coverage of these games claim they would be for that system. So I am going to treat these supposed games as if they were for the Wii U solely because that's funnier. This video is largely just going to be me going over bullet points and letting them speak for themselves, and occasionally interjecting if I have anything to add. First off, Game Freak were one of the first development studios inside Nintendo to receive alpha prototype hardware, now have been upgraded to the beta prototype hardware above. Have a few areas marked out, tons of concept art traveling between Pokemon Company and Nintendo. Game Freak plans to completely overhaul the basic systems of battle, simplifying the process. The development team is going to put a lot of ideas they have wanted to do for years in this game. The last two bullet points are very emblematic of fake video game leaks and really the culture of speculating around new releases as a whole. They hint at some big change but are very coy when it comes to giving concrete details about what that change actually is. The main part, completely overhaul the basic systems of battle, simplifying the process, could apply to several Pokemon games that came out after the leak, be it Let's Go or the Legends games. It's such a broad statement that it will inevitably come true regardless of the veracity of the leak itself. Theme is old tradition versus new exploration. New region, no name yet, is based on Southeast Asia with one large peninsula and many smaller islands. I'm not really sure about the logistics of having a Pokemon region based on multiple countries with significantly different cultures. Compared to say DQ3, where an entire country or a region of countries is simplified into one town, Pokemon regions are mapped closely enough to their respective origins that one town equals one town. Just one US state is generally large enough to base an entire Pokemon region on, as you can see with Or, Unova, and Alola. 4 Pokemon regions plus spin-offs in the Sevi Islands doesn't even cover all of Japan. And multiple countries in Southeast Asia are of comparable size to Japan, if not larger, so making a whole Pokemon region based on that whole chunk of land and sea just isn't going to work. 3 new starters with no names. Water evolves into Water Steel and is a squat, teardrop-shaped humanoid that has a jar filled with on its head. As it evolves, it grows taller and the jar bigger until it needs another set of arms to hold it on its head. Fire evolves into Fire Fairy and is a tiny cute Final Fantasy II with fire blowing out of its horns. Its horns and look evolves more menacingly until it has curly ram-like horns and a motorcycle hot rod-like look. Grass evolves into a Grass Electric and starts with a leaf for a face with a nubby root as a body, and evolves until it grows into an electric producing palm tree with each flower petal having a different face. I love how you can tell that the fire starter was the leaker picking an animal from the Chinese zodiac based on the arbitrary fan-made rule that was a thing until Fuecoco happened. Grass Electric seems like an odd combination for a starter Pokemon to have for the same reasons that giving a starter one of the other 2 starter types would be strange to me, but I probably would have said something similar about a Fairy starter Final Evo 1 generation after the type was added and then Primarina happened, so you win this one, random leaker. The main legendary for Pokemon Plus is a Shifu lion-looking psychic ground type that has multiple faces. The Pokemon Minus legendary is a ghost fairy that has 2 dashes for eyes and it's a hurricane-like appendages with many arms and hands. I'm mildly amused at how the leaker is able to clearly tell which myth was used for one legendary, and then for the other, they're more vague about it. More traditional Pokemon-like gameplay will be on the handheld controller, while an all-new gameplay aspect will be on the terminal unit. And then jumping forward to a later bullet point because it's easier to group these two together. The island gameplay with gym leaders and the Elite Four Island can be played entirely on the handheld and can be blown up on the terminal for home play. More of the vague, the gameplay is going to be completely new stuff. And sure, a game for a console like the Wii U having stuff you can only use if it's plugged into the TV makes sense. But the next mainline entry in a series that has the handheld aspect of it as a core part of its brand identity, locking its supposed big new gameplay features behind the home console seems pretty far-fetched to me. The Pokken Fighters render that was teased was running on alpha kits. Beta kits now have advanced cell shading, going for very detailed living anime look. Routes connecting the island together are water bridges, but clumps of island are connected together by underwater tunnels. There is a stone Slowking statue that is a parody of the reclining Buddha at Wat Po, Thailand. Many Pokemon from Hoenn and Sinnoh will make a return. This is a weird thing to specify because Pokemon from every past region make a return in a new game. I can maybe see a point when it comes to there being a higher concentration of Hoenn because that's an island region with a tropical climate which would naturally have similar Pokemon to a region that's multiple islands, but then Sinnoh, a region with a much colder climate, would go against that. Variety of Pokemon gyms. One is a mail system that only uses flying types and focuses on sky battles. One only uses baby Pokemon, one is implied to be a real vampire and uses ghost and dark Pokemon. There is also a military-like leader who uses fire and steel Pokemon. I also don't really think a mandatory sky battle is all that believable because in a game series where a big part of the appeal is picking off your own team, a boss fight where you can only use one type and/or one ability is just going to get in the way. New Pokemon types similar to Shinies, no details yet on how they work, but I've been told they changed the game significantly. The mainland is an MMO-like environment that is exclusive to the terminal and is shared by both versions. Players all over the world online can chat, trade, intermingle, and experience new updated storylines on the mainland. Pokemon Band is a new mechanic introduced to get people involved who do not battle, a cooperative experience where Pokemon dance and make music together to achieve the highest group score. Pokemon Bank are actual locations on the mainland and handheld areas where people can import past Pokemon, mainly from Pokemon X and Pokemon Y, into the new game. This is mostly pretty standard fare for a Pokemon leak. It's constantly making promises of something big happening, but also tries to be vague enough that it's not as easily opened up to scrutiny. And it's riddled with typos to boot. The reasons these bullet points are funny are reasons that Pokemon leaks in general are funny. However, there is one bullet point that I went out of my way to save for last because it makes Pokémon Plus and Minus go from just another leak to one that I find uniquely funny and have regularly thought about in the decade-long span of time where I knew of its existence. The new team villains are described as a bunch of Sohei Zealots types who have discovered the player's best friend as a reincarnation of a special type of person who is only alive every 100 years. They believe the old system where people were given a Pokemon egg and they stick to that Pokemon until they die and whose function in society dictate what role that person is. They are against the modern trend of Pokemon trainers and capturing multiple Pokemon and are making a holy pilgrimage to evoke the old legendaries to turn everything back to normal. They keep their player from their friend, saying the special one, who can do amazing things like Mega Evolve Pokemon without the use of a Mega Ring, only love is that of Pokemon and not people. It is planned to be revealed later that for the special one to fulfill their role in society, they must be mortally sacrificed to awaken the legendaries. The big thing that immediately stands out about this disproportionately longer bullet point is how edgy this story is for a Pokemon game. Regardless of how common it is to see criticisms of religion in RPGs, I feel like that's pushing it as far as what's allowed to appear in a series like Pokemon that aims for squeaky clean mass appeal. And while you can still argue that criticisms of religion is vague enough that it still has a non-0% chance, however unlikely, of appearing in a Pokemon game, you can't say the same for the phrase mortally sacrificed to awaken the legendaries. It reminds me of the darker TM stuff you'd see in ROM hacks or fan games where regardless of how good the execution could end up being, it's really hard to take seriously because it's in fucking Pokemon. But while that part is already funny enough, there's something more to this. Let me just list off a bunch of parts of this supposed story and see if they sound familiar. Game structured around a pilgrimage to seek the help of higher beings. Antagonistic organization with Buddhist theming in a story that seeks to criticize rigidly sticking to tradition. Friend character of importance to said antagonistic organization who the protagonist must save from being mortally sacrificed. If you're familiar with RPGs beyond Pokemon, it's probably clear by now what I'm getting at. I have reason to believe that the plot summary of these supposed Pokemon games was largely taken from Final Fantasy X. Other aspects of the leak line up with this theory. The completely new battle system, the region being a series of islands, inspiration taken from Southeast Asia on some level, etc. So much about these supposed games can easily be explained by the quote-unquote leaker looking at FFX, thinking it would be cool if there was a Pokemon game like it, and slightly tweaking the general gist of that game so as not to be too obvious. And I think that's the perfect encapsulation of why I'm cynical about the culture of speculating about new releases that video game leaks are inherently tied to. What's the point of obsessing over a game that doesn't exist yet, if it will even exist at all, when you'd more often than not be able to find what you value in that supposed game in something that already exists?